Thank you. I would like to first start with a thank you to OSI for inviting me to speak on open source technologies. I'm very excited to be here. Hope you're all having a fun learning experience in this virtual conference. I remember last year, I was physically present in OSI 2019 at the Nimans Convention Center, Bangalore. We had a stall and about 150 people visited us. We had a good time there. And unfortunately, due to this pandemic, we had to do it over virtual conference. Nevertheless, technology is the breather. And I think all of us are trying to unleash the technology to the best possible way. Okay. Now, this talk is slightly different than what you might have envisaged. It is about a case study of why and how we embraced open source technologies to build a digital governance platform. Okay. To give you a quick intro, MOSIP is an open source platform that countries can use. They can change, they can customize, and they can build their own digital ID platform. When I say a digital ID system, I'm actually talking about how governments can digitally register and uniquely identify residents so that various benefits can be provided to them. We will talk more about MOSIP in the upcoming slides. I'm just giving a quick view of what it is. Okay. Now, from the agenda point of view, we will briefly talk about the need of digital governance in the current context, because that is an essential way of creating a foundation of this talk. Okay, I know many of us know about digital governance, but we will still have some initial context switching that would help. Then we will look into some of the key challenges faced by nations while designing and implementing an ID system, which is actually very important to recognize and understand before really looking into the solution part of it. Right? I will also introduce MOSIP to you and talk about the reason why we looked at open source as a pathway for MOSIP. I'll also talk about various open source standards, tools, and technologies that we use in MOSIP. It's actually an important part of this presentation because that's very important to understand. That's exactly the reason why you'll be able to appreciate the reason why MOSIP actually moved to open source by looking at the tools and technologies that we are using. Then I will conclude by giving you a narrative on how you could contribute to MOSIP for real good cause. Okay, this is no normal software. It's a software that is going to live for generations together by actually changing people's lives, which is actually an important part of our existence. Okay. And then at the end, of course, I'll be very happy to take some questions. Okay, now let's talk about the need for digital governance. Okay. My dear friends, this is the era of global digitalization, right? Everyone is trying to make best use of technology in any field for that matter. Believe it or not, the pandemic actually has led people to look at better digital options, whether it is learning, shopping, collaborative working, healthcare, socializing, whatever you call it, right? I mean, I don't know whether I should say thank you to the pandemic or not. It may not be the right thing to do because of the suffering all of us are undergoing. But in a way, it has given us an option to make the best use of digital technology. Okay. So digital governance, or what we used to call it as, I think in my college days or even before, we used to call it as something called as e-governance, right? It used to come up, and there used to be this EDP centers in various government departments, having Microsoft disk operating system computers and stuff like that. It's a very old way. Now I think still e-governance as the technology word is being used, right? And digital governance or e-governance is no exception, right? Governments are trying to find new ways of serving their citizens through digital means, right? So, from e-passports to refugee registration cards, from online banking transactions, even to your social media profile, digital ID programs enable us to travel. They enable us to do business. And they also enable us to access services and stay connected at all times, right? I mean, there's no brainer here. Everything is normal, and this is something that we are actually experience on a daily basis, right? Now, what is important from the need for digital governance is how people are identified in the digital space, and it can have a massive implications for economies, societies, and individuals from the way people are identified, right? One thing that plays a very significant role is the power of trust, right? People do believe that these digital technologies would make their lives better and easy to do business with, right? And also easy to collaborate and become economically viable, right? So when that trust, which I'm talking about, the power of trust is compromised, the whole economic subsystem goes for a toss, right? It is massively damaging, right? So we really don't, when even in India, for example, when we are dealing with digital governance, we typically don't ask questions, right? We trust the government for all the schemes that they are providing, right, in a digital way. So it is very important that that power of trust is always maintained. Okay. Now, central to any digital ID governance program is the power of the ID, which is the power of identification people, and power of identifying people. Okay. And of course, governments that are digital, they tend to serve better, and they also tend to serve faster, right? Also, it nourishes good governance if it is put in good practice. Now, I just wanted to take you about 20 years back, maybe even more. If we were to go and open a bank account, right? It's not very easy to open a bank account, right? It's a very simple thing these days, but it's not very easy to open a bank account. You go and walk into a bank, you tell the manager or an executive that I want to open a bank account. Now, you actually have to have an introducer. And typically, that introducer can be a bank employee or someone who you know, or someone who has an account in the bank, or somebody who has a social presence in that place, right? So actually, you are asked a zillion questions, and then finally, of course, if you are trustworthy, they open a bank account. Of course, there are a lot of benefits that the bank gets by opening, by giving you an account, but you also get you also get socially benefited if you have a bank account. Today, it is not the case because, of course, they'll ask you a few questions, but it is very easy for banks as partners to really identify you as a citizen of this country, because the government actually has the technology to let the bank know that, yes, I know this person is my citizen, please open a bank account. So it's that much more easy, right? So digital governance has become more of a necessity now, and it is playing a very vital role in anything that we do in today's world, right? Okay. I'm trying to make things very simple so that I don't want to make things very complex and complicated. So we all are traveling in the same boat. Okay. Now, so let's also talk about, while we're talking about digital governance, let's also talk about the challenges in digital governance in general, right? Only when we understand the challenges, we would be able to appreciate the solution part of it. So let us now talk about the top challenges that the countries face in digital governance, right? See, for us as citizens, you see, things might sound simple and easy, but for governments, it is a huge challenge. One of the main challenges, especially in digital governance, is the vendor lock-in, right? Coupled with even what you call it as technology lock-in. Right? See, due to the lack of open standards and open source platforms a few years back, countries did not have any options, right, other than using proprietary solutions. Right? And especially with country ID systems, when you are stuck to a vendor and technology, countries are stuck for years together, right, with very limited options of migrating to other technologies. Right? ID systems are generally large, serving an entire population, maybe leading to several millions, if not billion, and they're very, very lucrative, from an economic standpoint, from cost standpoint, and also from a business standpoint for organizations, right? And it's a long-lasting relationship that organizations can have with countries, right? But however, you see, in any ID systems, there are scalability factors, there are security and privacy needs, there are affordability and cost needs, performance needs, manageability aspects of ID systems. All these play a very, very vital role, right? So if all these are managed by a few vendors, that is what we call as vendor lock-in. So one can understand the amount of insights that could be gained by third-party vendors, and the potential damage that could be caused, which actually could be caused to the social life of people, right? We have seen several cases. I'm not going to pinpoint. I'm not going to pick any examples here, but we know a lot of examples in the recent past, right? Typically, governments do not want that to happen, right? They want absolute control of their ID systems, right? So, in a sense, what we realize is that it is important for countries to manage their own ID systems the way they want, as per the country's security and privacy and legal laws that prevail in those countries, right? So that way, instead of spending millions of dollars in ID software, in building an ID software, is actually not necessary. It is actually better that the same money can be better utilized for citizens' benefit schemes, right? Because ultimately, that is economically more important, and that is also very important for countries' growth, right? So, considering the accelerated needs to go digital, it is very imperative, my dear friends, that open source solutions like MOSIP and open standards play a major role in powering such ID systems, right? So these are called, foundational ID systems. The country's focus and attention is shifted to good governance rather than dealing with ID systems per se, because ultimately they don't really care about how these systems operate, right? All they care about is how best the system could be used for good governance. That's the ultimate goal of any government, right? That's exactly what the challenges of any digital governance is all about. Of course, there are other challenges that are there, such as digital literacy of residents, ease of inclusion, and there are many things that come on the way. But I'm not actually going to talk about all that. We're only talking about some of the top challenges that countries deal with today. Okay, now see, having explained the value and the problems the country face, and we all now understand the value of open source, because open source actually has really penetrated in almost in every part of the industry now. I mean, I don't think anybody would say that open source is something that is only beginning. It's not the beginning. It's actually being used in critical needs of business, right? So having talked about the value of open source in powering ID systems, let me quickly introduce and talk about MOSIP. See, by difference, MOSIP stands for Modular Open Source Identity Platform. See, as it is very evident from the name itself, the platform is modular, like a group of Lego blocks where ID systems can be built, and it can be built using the components, right? And some of the components that you don't need, you leave it. Some of them you need, you obviously take it. So it's basically modular in nature. And being open source, countries have full access to the code on GitHub, and they could actually change according to their customization needs. That's the power of open source that we all know. MOSIP as a project is housed at the International Institute of Information Technology, Bangalore. And it is funded by philanthropic organizations like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, NORAD, Omidyar Networks, and Tata Trust. But that keeps our engine going all the day. It is also backed by international experts in various technologies such as ID, security, various standards, and even things like biometric standards, which are key to an ID system, right? The platform itself focuses on providing the core components for governance, such as basic ID issuance, authentication, biometric validations, digital signatures, signing an ID, security and privacy needs, eKYC services. These are all part of the ID system, and these are some of the things that is available as the core features of MOSIP anyway. Plus, we have made it easy to deploy, easy to manage and monitor, and also using various open source tools. Okay, we have been working on this project for about 2 years now. In the last conference, in the OSI conference, we introduced it to everybody. It is now fully open sourced. That means any government is free to take the code, customize it, and use the way they want. Currently countries like Philippines, Morocco, Ethiopia, Guinea are actively embracing MOSIP. and they are in different stages of implementation, such as pilot and staging and go live and things like that. We started our journey in about August 2018 with good support from Morocco as a country. They pledged the support. We took all the requirements from them, and then finally we actually have designed a very generic platform, although it is catering to other countries' needs also. Morocco was the first to actually support us as a country. Now in this journey, we are trying to build an ecosystem with like-minded people who care for global public good, from various governments, philanthropic organizations, security organizations, individuals, students, biometric providers, various people, right? We have delivered about 3 versions on GitHub, and we have a roadmap defined to deliver a long, stable, supported version called LTS version called 1.2 in January 2021. Anyway, that is about MOSIP. We will continue to look into interoperability standards. We'll use ready-made components, open source components. We'll add additional privacy features, consent frameworks, and things like that. There are more moving things. There are many moving things that are coming up, many more things that are coming up. And for many of these, we need a lot of help and support from the open source community. Okay, now I'm not going to actually focus too much on MOSIP in this presentation, but that's not the agenda of this presentation also. But I thought it would be a good value add and view of explaining what we are up to. Okay. Just to give you a quick view of this, as you see here, there are some of these countries who have shown interest in MOSIP. Some of them are, as I told you, are at the pilot stage, and some of them are going live. See, while the intention is not to go gaga about MOSIP, what you see here is countries are focusing on inclusion. You see, they're focusing on financial inclusion, they're focusing on direct benefit cash transfers, especially in the current pandemic time, the direct cash transfers to the needy who don't have jobs anymore, and they need money for feeding their family. All this is very important, right? Health coverage is extremely critical, and also social protection in general, right? So now what is important to understand here is that the central to all these is the unique ID, which is the central nervous system of any social governance system. The ID is very important, right? And countries can rely on for identifying their citizens for government needs. Today, many third world countries do have such schemes. But what they lack is the notion of this ID. Even, you see, even in India, if you take about, I would say 20, 25 years back, we had all kinds of schemes, right? Government used to give all kinds of schemes, but we didn't have a single way of identifying a resident, right? And we had all kinds of ID recognition mechanisms, from paper-based mechanisms, passports, ration cards. We had many things, right? Voter ID, PAN card, and stuff like that. And there's no single way of identifying people, right? There's no trusted way of identifying people. That's where some of these benefits were not getting transferred directly to people for the needy, right? And that is where I believe that ID systems are important. And as I explained before, that is where open source based ID systems like MOSIP play a very significant role in creating and managing that ID, right? And that is the factor of trust that people get in as an ID system, and that is where it is designed for the global public good. Okay, now let me quickly talk about why in MOSIP we chose to go the open source way. What is the reason why we took open source way, open source path? Let me talk about that. See, we talked about vendor lock-in, we talked about technology lock-in. Being open source, the complete ownership of the ID is with the country, right? No more there's a vendor who comes in between. There's no middleman. Okay. What we provide is a platform, right? Not a ready-made, ready-to-deploy ID system, right? Countries customize the platform according to their needs. For example, let me give you some examples here for the benefit of this particular discussion. Philippines, for example, wanted something called as a marital status and blood group in their ID schema. Okay, that means what it means is every ID that is generated should have a marital status and blood group. That's their purpose. That's their legality. Okay. Whereas some other country like Guinea, whom we are working with, doesn't need this. They in fact not even thinking about these, right? They have a very generic ID schema like name, date of birth and address and things like that, which is normal. But they also wanted something like they wanted to scan all three biometrics like fingerprint, iris, and face. And they also wanted this biometrics for children who are between 6 and 17 years of age, whereas it's a very unique way of classifying them, right? And whereas some other countries may say that we do not want to use face as the biometric authentication option at all, because we believe that face is not a very viable option, whereas probably fingerprint or iris are more trustworthy, right? So that is why the platform is very, very highly customizable, right? You also know what is cooking inside, right? With being open source, because everything is transparent. So the security also goes beyond obfuscation, right? Code obfuscation is no more a necessity, right? With open source, and there's also transparency in what lies inside. There is no need to ask anyone. The proof actually is there in the pudding. Okay. Now, so being open source, there's also a choice and variety of tools to manage and monitor, including proprietary tools, right? Also, being open source, MOSIP opens up a world of integration opportunities with other open source and other open standards systems. Let me give an example. See, there is another open source system called OpenCRBS, which actually provides something called as a civil registry solution, which is something like registering the birth and death of residents and marriage registration and divorce and things like that. These are all part of the OpenCRBS system. What they do not have is a concept of an ID. Right? They're actually implementing something in Bangladesh, but they don't have an ID. So what they have decided is they integrate, instead of creating an ID system, which is unnecessary waste of time for them and not their business also, they are integrating with MOSIP. So what it means is, before issuing or before registering a marriage, for example, let's take a good one actually, or registering a birth, right? They actually talk to the MOSIP based ID system or any ID system for that matter, and they try to get the ID of the person. Once an ID is obtained, it's very easy for them to trust that this person is a legal resident, and it is very easy for them to register into the civil registry repository. Please understand that civil registry is different from an ID system, because ID is all about centrally issuing an ID to any resident. What happens after the ID issuance is a different purpose altogether. Okay, so this is exactly why we actually MOSIP went open source, because it's easy to it's transparent, and it is evolutionary, it is customizable, and there's also a possibility of local participation in the country, whichever country is using MOSIP. There's always a local participation. Cost, we don't have to talk about it, because ultimately the cost that is saved is used elsewhere for a better benefit scheme, right? Okay. Okay, now this would be interesting for the techies, I guess. Just wanted to briefly touch base on the open source technologies that we use, because I'm sure that you've been wanting to hear about what kind of open source technologies that we use in creating MOSIP. Okay. See, the first thing that we use is we use OpenJDK, right? Instead of a commercial JDK. That is because an OpenJDK it is open sourced, and the contribution comes from multiple organizations like Oracle, Red Hat, IBM, Apple, Microsoft, etc. Similarly, we use OpenJFX for all our reference UI implementations instead of a Java FX platform. So we used to have something called as a Java FX platform sometime before, something like our UI, where UI was developed using a Java FX. But ever since OpenFX became stable, we moved to OpenFX. It's no more Java FX in any of our implementations. Okay. On the database side, the default one is Postgres. Of course, although it is an open source, it's an open source database. Although all the code connections to the database is via something called as a Java persistent API. So what this means is it is very easy to replace a Postgres database with some other equivalent database without having to change code. We use JPA, and underlying layer is of course JDBC. Right? It is also interesting to note that the internal database transactions happen using an in-memory cached database called H2DB, which is a very high-performing open source database caching technology. All our storage connectors use something called as a MinIO, which is again an open source abstraction via something called as an object storage via an S3 object storage connector, which means you could actually have your backend storage system as an HDFS system or an NFS storage, or even your EXT, NTFS, CEPH, and stuff like that. Okay. Now coming to deployment, we actually have a one-click deployment scripts which are completely written using open source software such as Terraform, Ansible playbooks, and even Helm charts. All the functionalities are microservices based, Dockerized, and they're orchestrated by a Kubernetes cluster. This means that all of them are microservices which are elastically scalable and deployable as per the needs. On the server side, we use Vertex for staged processing of our data packets. We use something called as a WebSub, which is again an open source implementation of the intra-module communication, which is actually using a publisher-subscriber mechanism. The whole server code is written using Spring Framework, using annotations that makes the code easy to maintain and debug. See, one thing that we have to understand is when it comes to open source, if you are seeking code contributions, the code has to be easily read and interpreted. That's very important for open source contributors to understand the code and contribute back. That way, it's very important that we make existing frameworks viable to use, like Spring Framework as an example. Again, we have integrated with open source monitoring frameworks such as Kibana, Grafana, Prometheus for monitoring various services. There is also a powerful functional and acceptance test rig. The functional test rig uses REST assured framework because all the services that in Mosaic uses are all REST services, which is actually platform and language independent. And the acceptance test rig uses a DSL, which could be hooked onto a BDD, like a Cucumber kind of BDD, or using Gherkin as the language for writing acceptance test rig. So this is a very good area of contribution, right? And there are many more open source tools that I haven't covered and have not spoken about, but the idea here is to let you know the power of open source technologies and framework that Mosaic uses. And of course, the benefits, of course, are reaped by the countries, right? Okay. Now, just to touch base on the open standards, see, when it comes to open standards, Mosaic needs standards, because without standards, we are not going to interoperate, right? The biometrics, for example, are using ISO formats in the header, and basically they're all standard CBEF templates. All the biometrics are represented using CBEF, which is a standard way of representing biometrics data. Okay, and these are all having ISO headers that makes it absolutely standard as per the NIST convention. We use JSON Web Tokens, and we also use OpenID Connect for all the inter-application session management. We use JMS for messaging and WebServe as a standard intra-process communication. All the functionalities are microservices based and use REST services. Okay. We are also taking active participation in several industry initiatives such as FIDO, the DID Alliance, NIST, and we are also always in look for standards around consent management, data exchanges, interoperability with other ID systems, offline authentication using QR code. Actually, interestingly, we are working with some prominent institutions like the Turing Institute in UK and Carnegie Mellon universities for the students' projects. Even in IIITB itself, a lot of students are doing their internship with Mosaic. So this actually takes it quite well forward, because from a open source point of view, the participations outweigh the way things are organized. So that way we are actually soliciting a lot of participation in the needs. Now, on behalf of Mosaic, when it comes to opportunities, let me seek your help in making Mosaic better. We are very young, just about 2 years old baby with lots of enthusiasm. We need your help in many areas, such as fixing bugs, triaging defects, testing, documentation, and running various security tools on our platform and reporting vulnerabilities. Because what we use our standard WASP security tools, again open source. But I'm sure that this is an area that privacy and security are of paramount importance. So if anybody is interested and have good security and privacy background, you could actually help us. And there are various opportunities in developing things like reporting frameworks, writing mobile apps. We don't have a mobile app yet. Either we let countries to write, or we probably come out with a reference implementation and countries can use it directly and modify it. We don't have a mobile app yet. We need health monitoring. We need fraud detection and analytics, because ultimately, when it comes to ID issuance, it is very important that we use some kind of either machine learning based, artificial intelligence based fraud detection systems. Again, an open source way of fraud detections that can be leveraged. So if you are a developer, the good place to start is to fix some easy, good first bugs, okay? And raise some pull requests to us on GitHub. We will review the code and that you have submitted. We will suggest some corrections and absorb it, okay? And you may slowly graduate towards writing enhancements and even working on some new feature implementations, right? If you're a test engineer, automation is a critical area that needs lots and lots of help. Ours is a 90% automation, I would say REST API based system, where automation is the need. I mean, you can't do the manual way of testing is not an option at all, right? So we need a lot of help there. The countries who are actually embracing like MOSIP also need a robust automation framework, test automation suite, so that they could use it, they could modify, and they could actually test their pilot and production system. So that way, the trust on the ID systems goes leaps and beyond. Okay, so this is a very important area, and that's a very major needs major attention too. If you are a manual tester, that's okay. We will give you a sandbox against which you could actually run some tests and report back, because again, reporting issues early enough is a good practice. There are opportunities in improving documentation. If you are a biometrics expert, definitely a major role to play. We would like to hear from you in terms of how biometrics can be leveraged and implemented. For example, there's somebody said that you need to have something called as live finger detection, right? So what we have is fingerprint recognition, but we probably don't have live finger detection. So if somebody wants to implement something called as a live finger detection, so it's a possible opportunity. Overall, any new ideas, any new ways of doing things, like new ways of dealing with privacy, security, biometrics. If you have any kinds of expertise, we would request you to collaborate with us. See, you can use our mailing list, or we are on groups.io, or you could join us a chat channel on GitHub. All that you need is a GitHub ID to log into GitHub. Or you could write to us on info@mosip.io. You could even write to me directly at krish@mosip.io. So this is for public good. We are actually changing lives of many countries, many citizens across the globe. Most likely, this is the only open source platform currently available, while we would like to see other digital ID open source platforms that are coming through. So we would like to hear from you. So thank you very much for your patience. I hope you found my session useful and interesting too. Let me take some questions here.
Thank you for a lovely session, sir. We have a few questions for you.
Yeah.
There is one from Biplab Roy. He's asking, what about the myths and facts about a well-known statement, propaganda, that open source tools are buggy, less efficient and less feature-rich compared to a proprietary software tools?
It's a very good question. I think the gentleman himself said it's a myth. So I would say that probably if you're asking me this question about 4 or 5 years back, I would probably agree that open source tools, the standards of open source tools are a myth and evolving and things like that. Today, our experience is that open source tools outweigh some of the proprietary tools also. In my opinion, I don't think open source tools are anyway lagging at all. You see, for example, I gave you some examples of Grafana, Prometheus, JMeter. Actually, there's an endless list of tools. And you have the option of evaluating which is the best tool that suits you, right? Of course, you have to be a bit careful in consuming open source tools because there are a whole lot of options available. That's where, you have to look at how many committers are there, what is the vibrancy of the open source community, what was the last release that they made, how many features that they have added, how many pull requests and commits they have been having over the last few months. What kind of social commitment they have, how active are they in answering questions. There's so many things that needs to be evaluated before even selecting an open source tools. But I believe that open source tools are very, very prominent and very powerful today.
Thank you, sir. There is one more, actually two more. If someone builds an open source solution, how to build a business and revenue generation model around the solution?
Very standard open source question, or very standard, good question though. Okay, open source is free. Now, if I were to take it for my personal use, I don't have to pay anything to anybody, right? I use it the way I want, I modify it, provided I'm a savvy technical person. But if you look at countries or even enterprises for that matter, or anybody who wants to do serious business with open source solutions, now I don't think anybody would take an open source solution and just use it directly. There are support needs that are necessity. For example, if you take a country, if the countries have a very good technical resource, they may not directly use it and they may deploy it. But typically what countries do is, in developing IT systems, they have somebody called as a system integrator. A system integrator could be a large organization who could actually be experienced in rolling out ID systems, experienced in security, experienced in identity and access management in general. So what they do is, countries go to them through a bidding process, they identify the best possible system integrator, and these system integrators actually do implementation based on an open source platform. Okay. Now, the support, everything is borne by the system integrator. Of course, the open source community would be able to resolve a lot of issues through community participation, through philanthropic donations and stuff like that. But the actual real business needs, you actually need a strong integrator who would actually integrate and support you.
Thank you. One last question from Mr. Biplav is, how will MOSIP address the aspects of the previous two questions?
MOSIP is already addressing the aspects of previous two questions. I think let me go one question before. MOSIP actually is currently used by countries via system integrators. There are two things that MOSIP does here. One is, since we are funded by philanthropic organizations, we get money from for good governance. We actually get donations. So that will keep us going, right? That will also keep us going with our salaries and all that. But that we cannot sustain only with that. We also have to use the money that is given to us for community development. That is where I come to these conferences to build trust and propagate about MOSIP and ask for contributions. So from a MOSIP point of view, from the releases point of view, we are there, right? As long as the donations are there, we will continue to enhance MOSIP. Now, when it comes to the deployment point of view, right? Countries actually deploy system integrators, and countries use them as the expert body for evaluating MOSIP. They actually evaluate MOSIP. They do a pilot. They check whether everything is fine. It is bug free. It is scalable, and countries actually put the entire the entire objective on the system integrator, who would actually take MOSIP forward, and they'll customize it, modify it the way they want, and implement it for the country. That is what is actually happening with the countries whom I talked about. So that is the answer for the first question, I believe.